Hello, Education 2220 students. I hope everyone had a great week last week. So, if we recap, last week we were talking about partnering with families and being an advocate for students in the classroom. Well, now we're moving into Module 5, which is going to be talking about Universal Design for Learning, also sometimes referred to as UDL. So, we're going to look at what those principles of UDL are in terms of designing your classroom. Really, there are 7 principles, but there's 3 core principles that we are going to be focusing on, which is representation, action, and expression. Um, and engagement. So action and expression go together, and then you have engagements. We're also going to look at the differences between UDL and differentiated instructions and how both of them are going to be able to support behavior, um, practices as far as evidence base, and then assistive technology is used as well. And this week is going to fall seamlessly into Module 6, which is next week. The next week, because we're still going to continue looking at how we design our lessons, right? So, how do we modify our classrooms and construct the learning environments? So, it's going to kind of flow seamlessly into that. But before we get into going over Module 5, I really want to talk about our calendar so we can look ahead at what the expectations are and where you should be in the semester as of now. So if we look, we're in week October 6th to the 12th. So working in Module 5, we're doing Universal Design for Learning Principles and Inclusive Design. You will have your module quiz, and then you will have your assignment this week, which I will go over. We're working in Chapter 2. Next week, the following week, is fall break. So that's going to be 2 days off for you, the 13th and 14th, where you don't have classes. The college is still open, but I do want you to look here. We're also going to be having our midterm exam during that week. And you're going to be responsible for 2 chapters, chapters 8 and 10. You're going to be reading that go along with Module 6. So there's a lot going on. Um, and so I just want to make you aware. Also, if you'll look beyond that, something that you'll see in Module 7, it's a 2-week module, but also that your service learning referral confirmation forms are due on October 23rd. So, what does that mean? As of now, I should have made contact with almost everyone as far as where you are. You should be placed. Um, or at the very least, the school has been contacted. If I haven't reached out to you, it's your responsibility to reach back out to me in regards of your placement to kind of see where you are. The service learning referral confirmation form can only be submitted to teams once I've reached out to you and you have a placement. And then the principal and the mentor teacher you're with will then sign that form stating that they allow you to be in that classroom, and then you will submit it to teams. So it's important for you to already be placed before you can submit that form, because the administrator of that school or of that set that school or that institution or that site, excuse me, will have to be able to sign to say that's okay, as well as the teacher you're being placed with. So it's important for you to communicate to me. Have you not heard anything? If you've got placed, if you have been placed, remember, you do not get the green light until I get that referral confirmation form. At that point, I will email you saying you have the green light, and then you begin your hours. Some schools and sites are a little bit more particular as far as how long they give you how long they give you in terms of getting those 12 hours in. So it's important for you to make sure that when you do make contact, whether you call them or email them or go down to the school or the site itself, when you get them to sign the form, make sure that you talk about scheduling your 12 hours, what days, how long do they allow you to be in there to get your 12 hours done. That's something that you will have to communicate with them and make sure you're on board and know the expectations. Also, your work-based learning interview or your peer review article. So again, that was that choice-based article where excuse me, choice-based project that you had a choice to do. So you could either choose to do an interview, which you interview who a parent who has a child with special needs, or you did a peer review article, or you chose to do the work-based learning where you're in the schools or going to the sites with the students. So that is due October 26th. Please make sure you go to course projects and service learning because all of the information on the choice-based projects is in there regarding which one you chose. It is due on the 26th of October, so don't wait till the last minute to do that. So that's pretty much going to keep us where we need to be for the next few weeks ahead. The next video, I will talk more about the co-teaching because again, that's going to be due in November and we want to make sure that we got our sights set on that. And then once I feel like many people have gotten their green light, I will go ahead and talk a little bit more about the journal. So if you do have the green light, remember there are written assignments that go along with your service learning project. You do have to complete a journal entry for each day that you're there, and then you will do a written analysis paper at the end, reflecting on your experience. So just keep that in mind. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into Module 5. So as I mentioned, Module 5 is UDL or Universal Design for Learning. And this module is going to provide you with that look inside of UDL and how yes, it differs from differentiated instruction. We're going to talk about how it does, but then how we're going to use this to design a lesson plan, to think about starting to meet the needs of diverse learners and what that would look like and how we would apply these principles to be able to meet those needs. So if we look at the module overview and outcome, we're looking at the three core principles. Now, there are multiple principles of UDL. There are 7, I believe, but we're looking at the core principles, which is going to be representation, which is called the what of learning, multiple means of action and expression, which is the how of learning. And then we have the multiple means of engagement, the why, right? And so when you are using UDL, right, this is a framework, it allows you to create a flexible learning environment. And that is going to really help you with planning your instruction, looking at what do they see in your classroom? What are they hearing? The conversations from you and their peers. Uh, what, how do they speak? How do they move throughout the classroom? What are they reading? What are they writing? Do they seem to understand or comprehend? What are you having them attend? Where's their attention at? How do you have the classroom organized? How is it that you're keeping them engaged? And what are they supposed to remember? So all of these things really support learners if we start thinking about them in terms of UDL. Also, it's going to have some differentiated instruction in our book, and how you could also pair that with UDL to make sure you support not only instructional, but you're supporting behavior management. And then you're throwing in assistive technology on top of that. So our course outcomes you'll see here, I want you to be able to, when you're done with this semester, you're going to explore the different types of placements and related services for students with exceptionalities and the use of characteristics of each to determine the least restrictive environment for each individual. You're going to articulate a general understanding of the assessment process leading to a student's eligibility for special education services. Discuss and demonstrate basic knowledge and skills in constructing and modifying classroom learning environments by identifying roles, responsibilities, and best practices for regular education teachers when working with students with sectionalities. And then lastly, explore the importance of implementing appropriate behavior management techniques, modifications, and accommodations, including assistive technology for students with exceptionalities. So you know there are many uh, student learning outcomes in this course. But these are the ones that we're going to be able to dive some more into with our learning objectives through this module, right? So we're going to define what the term universal design means. We're going to explain how UDL, what it is and how it's evolved. You're going to discuss those 3 essential qualities, which we talked about, those 3 core principles: means of representation, means of action and expression, and then means of engagement. And then lastly, you should be able to compare the difference between UDL and differentiated instruction and how they're used in the classroom. So, as always, I kind of give you those key words and concepts that I really want you to hone in and focus on that's going to help gauge your understanding and meet those module objectives. And then at the end, you'll be able to master those course objectives. But you want to look at universal design for learning, right? Because we said this is like a framework, it's proactive. So you're going to use it to design inclusive instruction. Then we're going to look at how this was developed by CAST. And CAST, you'll hear that or you'll see that throughout the chapter. And it's really the Center for Applied Special Technology. So you're going to see that UDL was developed by CAST. But what we're focusing on is like, what are we talking about when we say universal access, right? Um, and how this evolved. The three core principles of UDL, right? And what we should be doing in our classroom practice, which we talked about. Varied learners, so learner variability, inclusive design, and the difference UDL versus differentiated instruction. So we know that UDL is a framework that really it helps look at how you deliver and the engagement um, and how the students are taking that information in. Whereas differentiated instruction really is looking at maybe just making some adjustments or adaptations after you identify their needs. Okay, so there's a little bit of difference there, and the textbook really dives into that as well. And then you have technology integration. So this would be things that would be assisting the students, so or assisting you as well. So it'd be things like text to speech, interactive media, any kind of digital scaffolds, right? So that's going to support that area of access and expression. And then we've got assessments in UDL. So we talked about inclusive design, right? And you're going to see that in your chapter about how you design the lesson, looking at those three core principles: the representation, action, expression, and engagement. But also, we have to have an emphasis on um, assessing them. So, how are you going to know that they met the standards, right? So, we are going to be flexible in how we give the assessment to see what they know. So that's what the textbook will also talk about. So these are the ones I really want you to focus on when you're going through the chapter. And again, you're going to see that you have the standards here for both in task, which these are the teacher preparation standards because you're preparing to be a teacher. So we're going to be looking at learner development and learning differences. And then under counsel for exceptional children, again, individual learning difference and learner development. But then we're also going to be looking at professional learning and ethical practice. So those are the standards under counsel for exceptional children, or CEC. Okay, so here are your resources. You're going to be looking in chapter 2 in your textbook, and in a minute, I'm going to point out some key things I want you to kind of look at with the PowerPoint. But I also have another IRIS module. Now, you will not be turning this in. Sometimes I make you turn in the assessment. This one is specifically to help you dive a little bit deeper into universal design for learning. So if you look here, there's a iris module, and what this iris module is looking at in terms of UDL is looking at how do you design those experiences that are going to make sure that students are being engaged, but you're also challenging them. So that is a really good professional development for you, if you will. And if we go down to our activities and assessments, you will be completing a UDL lesson plan um, and designing using those three core principles, right? So I'll get into that in a minute. Um, Using a social studies lesson plan. So I've got like a little scenario that you're going to use to complete this lesson plan. And then you will have your Module 5 quiz. So you'll see here that the quiz will close on October the 12th, and you will have to submit your UDL lesson plan to the Dropbox by October 12th. Before we get into that, as far as your assignment, I want to go over our PowerPoint. So the thing that I wanted to concentrate on is when you're reading the chapter, I wanted you to see that there's multiple principles in terms of universal design, okay? Not UDL. UDL is universal design for learning. But if we're specifically looking at universal design, it shows equitable use, flexibility in use, it's simple and intuitive use, perceptible information, tolerance for error, low physical effort, size and space for approach and use. So if we're looking at just universal design, you're going to see that this right here is showing this is what we're going to see in the classroom. This is what we want to see. They're going to make mistakes. There's tolerance for that. There shouldn't be a lot of effort physically to move around your room. How are you designing and setting up your room? Look at your space you have, the size of the things that you have. How are they going to approach these items? How are they going to use it? It should be simple and intuitive where they can just pick it up. Your classroom needs to be flexible, equitable, or diverse. So when we talk about universal design for learning, we're really using these principles from universal design, right? And we have to think about the implications in our actual classroom, right? So we have to be flexible. We have to look at all of our instruction, um, the materials that we have, the things that we put up for them to look at. So UDL really obviously derived from universal design, but it's really looking it's designed from a lot of brain-based research, meaning that it's looking at three specific areas in your brain. It's looking at recognition systems, it's looking at strategic systems, and it's looking at affective systems. So I put it in this chapter, PowerPoint chapter, excuse me, there is a chart here, and it's going to show you different areas of your brain, right? So there's three areas we're looking at. And the reason we're talking about this is because this is going to give you better understanding of how UDL works when we're designing and engaging with students. So when we look at the recognition networks, this is called the what of learning. Excuse me. So this is how students are going to gather the information, right? So can they categorize? What are they seeing? What are they hearing? What are they reading? Identifying letters and words, and that is the what. Okay, so this part of their brain is was responsible. Okay, then we have strategic networks. This is called the how of learning. So it's in this part of the brain. This is where they're actually going to be doing something, right? They're going to be able to organize and express the information that you've given them, right? So you're going to have them do something and perform some kind of tasks with what they're learning. Then you have the why. So this is where that engagement piece comes in, right? So how are we having them be engaged? What are we having them do when they have challenges? Are they able to overcome it? We have to look at self-regulation skills, that reflective piece, all of that. So in sense, when we're looking at how UDL was developed, we're looking at this brain-based research, right? And so what we looked at also with that is that we started to tie in some we tied in some theories, some learning theories. Now, if you have other educational courses like Intro to Education, or or educational psychology, you're going to be talking about these theories. So we have the cognitive and social learning theories, which is a zone of proximal development, Piaget's stages of development, and then also Bloom's taxonomy. We look at learning preferences. We also look at multiple intelligences. So all of these are really taking in UDL. We're all combining this for the universal design for learning. Okay. So when we're talking about UDL, there are implications that we think about, right? For teaching and the students learning. So we look at what you're doing and then what the students are doing. So there are four general approaches to learning, right? So there is visual, verbal, tactile, kinesthetic, visual, nonverbal, and then auditory verbal. Okay. And there are characteristics for each of those approaches. And then there's learning tools. So the way you have to look at this chart, right, is these are the types of learners that you're going to have. Okay, we know that. So we're looking at visual, verbal, right? Then we're going to look at tactile kinesthetic. So these are their hands on. Visual and verbal means that they're really, they like to see information visually. They like to study in quiet rooms. They want to have information paired with print, some kind of visual, right? And then tactile kinesthetic, excuse me, I cannot talk this morning. They prefer hands-on learning, right? So this is where they want to be physically moving throughout the room. Then the next approach of the learner that you have is your visual or nonverbal, right? So that's a little bit different than the verbal. So these types of students, yes, they like visual, but these students are very artistic. They prefer to be a quiet room. They don't want to like um, study in groups. They use visual pictures to remember. And then lastly, you have auditory or verbal. So they're really good at listening to lectures or listen to you teach, right? They interact best with talking it out with their partners and exchanging ideas. Um, and they use what they hear from you and they like to repeat the information out loud. Okay, so those are the learning characteristics for each type of these learners. Okay, and remember, when you're looking at these, think of these as approaches. How am I approaching this type of learner? How am I approaching this visual verbal learner? Here are their characteristics. Then the last column is the learning tools. Okay, so remember, you have teaching and learning, their implications, and we're going based on how we're going to approach each type of learner. So what learning tools would you use with a visual verbal student? Or what kind of tools would you use with tactile kinesthetic? Well, obviously anyone that's hands-on, field experiences, demonstrations of teaching where they get manipulatives, they get to actually do what you're doing. And then um, it goes down through each one of those approaches or those types of learners of what you would do. Okay, so remember, we said there's three core principles or three qualities. I like calling them qualities because I don't want you to get it mixed up with those principles for universal design. We're specifically looking at those core qualities. It's going to be multiple means of representation. You must have that. You have to have multiple means of engagement and multiple means of action expression whenever you are designing lessons. Okay. So here is some charts more, and you're going to see a lot of this in your textbook, but I don't want to spend too much time going over it, but I wanted to just let you see what was important in terms of the what of learning, the how of learning, and the why of learning, right? And just to remember that when we're talking about multiple means of representation, we're talking about the what, right? How are you providing the information to them? Then we're looking at action and expression, right? Multiple means of that. And this is the how, right? So, how are you monitoring students? How are you setting out to plan them? What are they physically doing, right? How are you assessing them? How are they practicing these skills? And then engagement is really how they're engaging in the actual environment itself. This is the why of learning. Why are you having them engage in this activity? Okay, so those are the three core qualities that you'll be focusing on in chapter 2. So let's go ahead and get into our assessments. How are you going to be assessed this week? So if you'll look here, you obviously have your Module 5 quiz, which I told you about earlier. It will close October 12th. The assignment that you have to turn into Dropbox is going to be UDL lesson plan. So I'm going to take a time to go over it. So when you click on it, this is what you're going to see. What you're going to do is you're going to develop a lesson plan that incorporates those universal design for learning principles, right? That we talked about. And then you're going to evaluate your plan through reflection questions. So I have given you a scenario, okay? So over the summer, Miss Swan, the principal at your school, organized a professional development conference on universal design for learning. As the new academic year begins, you have been asked to help lead a session on UDL during a school-wide workshop. So you and two other fourth grade teachers are tasked, with applying UDL principles to create a model lesson plan. Together, your team will select a social studies topic appropriate to fourth grade, brainstorm multiple ways to present the content to ensure accessibility for all learners, and then you're going to adapt the lesson to meet the diverse learning needs by utilizing the three core areas: multiple means of representation, action and expression, and engagement. Okay, so let's focus on and break down the assignment. You're going to select first a social studies topic. So if you'll look here underneath activities and assessment, I have listed the Tennessee social studies standards from the State Department. So those are there for you. So go through, and I want you to see fourth grade, you will be on page 51. So you'll go to page 51 on the state standards. okay? And you'll see that they've started, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to go through and pick out which social studies standard that you would like to cover with the student, or to use in your lesson plan, excuse me. And you're going to use a lesson plan template that I have created for you. So I will show you what it looks like. Okay, so this is going to be what you are going to complete and fill out. Okay, so your subject will be social studies. Your unit is going to again come from where you picked. So a unit would be, for instance, say you wanted to talk about, you wanted to analyze the causes and consequences of the French and Indian War and recognize Fort Loudoun's role in it. Okay, so that would be the standard you'd cover. The topic would be the War for Independence, right? So that's what you would put here. And then your lesson, right? So you would list the state learning objectives. Essential question would be what you wanted them to learn. Again, it's going to come from your standard. And then any vocabulary you would need for that lesson. And then we're going to go by and start filling out multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, multiple means of action expression, and then the materials you would need for each part. And then down here was that reflection piece I talked about, right? To see how you did. So for each method that you chose, right? Explain why you chose that approach, and then describe how it addresses the needs of diverse learners. So I broke it down a little bit for you. Underneath multiple means of engagement in this section here, okay, remember you have to list 3, okay, uh, the first one is auditory. So then you, right here, would put in an auditory approach. Then the next one would be visual. So then you would put in a visual approach. And then the last one would be tactile kinesthetic. And then you would put in a tactile kinesthetic. And then you would be listing all of those for engagement. Then you would do the same thing for representation. Okay, and if you'll look here in the assignment, they're the same. Okay, so the first section is identify 3 ways to engage student aligning with the following modes: visual, auditory, tactile, kinesthetic. You are going to have to use your textbook to help you with this and filling out this lesson plan, because there are tables embedded in the book that is going to give you a reference, if you will. And it's going to show you some examples of multiple ways to engage students. And your job is to fill out, um, pick out one for auditory, one out for visual, one out for tactile kinesthetic. So when you put it in here, right, for engagement, you would just put the materials you would need. Again, that is in your book. Okay. And the same thing is going to go when you go to multiple means of representation, which is the second column in your lesson plan. You're going to identify 3 methods for presenting lesson content and then align with the following modes. Now, again, I want you to reference table 2.5. It says multiple ways to present lesson content. Okay. And then lastly, the last column here is going to be your action and expression. You're going to identify 3 ways to provide students to respond to information received, right? So this is how you're going to assess them. You always got to think about how you're going to assess the student. And you're going to use table 2.6, um, which is multiple ways students can express themselves. And again, you're looking at these 3 areas or approaches: auditory, visual, tactile, kinesthetic. So how are you going to approach these learners here? And then lastly, at the bottom here is going to be this section right here. So you're going to download and just complete this form and lesson plan template, if you will, and that's what you'll submit. But you'll see the same questions are down here. Okay, it says after completing your lesson plan, you're going to write a self-evaluation, which is at the bottom of the lesson plan form. Explain why you chose this approach, why you chose each approach here, and then describe how it addresses. And then The last one is just providing evidence from the textbook. Now, the evidence can come from the reference table or anywhere in the book. Okay, now you have to include citations. That just is talking about, you don't have to do a formal APA citation. That's just talking about what page did you get it from. Now, if you use something aside from the textbook, right, then you need to include those citations. And then you're going to discuss how your activity will enhance teaching and learning, specifically in the context of the scenario. So to reflect, I want to see how you think that this is going to enhance teaching and learning based on our scenario up here. And I didn't put that in the lesson plan form, but I do want you to write it just in this same box here. So that will be pretty much your activity that you will complete. Again, if you look at activities and assessments, you've got the lesson plan template there. You're going to fill it out. The directions are the first one you'll see, and then you've got your social studies standards to pick from there. And don't forget, the IRIS module is not to be turned in, but I do want you to go through and then do the assessment as well. Because I feel like it will dive a little deeper into it, especially when we're talking about designing those learning experience, which will help you. I actually suggest doing that before you fill out the lesson plan. All right. So remember, make sure that you really engage with chapter 2 because it's going to fall seamlessly into our module 6, which is going to be how do we construct and modify the learning environment, which is something that's important for UDL as well. We always say the classroom is the second teacher. And if there's 2 of you in the classroom, then the environment will be the third teacher. So all right. Don't forget to reach out to me if you've not heard anything from me regarding service learning. You need to get placed because it's coming up really soon as far as when that due date is for you to get that referral confirmation form in. You got to have time to get your 12 hours. All right. I hope everyone has a great week. And until next time, take care.